All credit to the penalty kill unit, a group that's one of the only things on which Calgary Flames fans can rely.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. This is Locked On Flames, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Penalty kill prowess. It is a statistical fact how good the Calgary Flames power play has been, especially as of late. We'll give them their due while also examining a little bit more of those power play and offensive issues that Calgary has had. Last show, we looked at the top three scorers for Calgary, the top 3 point earners. Today, we'll examine number 4 through 6. And this week-ish in Calgary Flames history, looking back at the 334 game. My name is Ryan G. I'm a lifelong play-by-play broadcaster. I am based in the Pacific Northwest and been a Flames fan since 2004 when they made the Cup run, and Peter Marr was the soundtrack of my days when I had nothing else to do, working on a job that required me to kind of sit in the back of a retail store and be available to answer questions. I was extremely bored, and luckily I found internet radio sharing Peter Marr's broadcast and remind me of the Calgary Flames since I grew up an hour south of Alberta. It was an interesting time, but it's kind of put me on this path to watch 40-plus Flames games for the last decade and a half, and now with you on Locked On Flames. How about the penalty kill? It continues to be one of the bright spots for what has otherwise been a fairly unremarkable season for the Calgary Flames, continuing to struggle in the standings and more so looking like a team that has a top 5 pick on its mind as opposed to a team that's going to make the final spot in the wild card playoffs. And certainly for you on Team Tank, that is exciting news. But one of the reasons Calgary has been in a lot of the games that they've been in is they found ways to create offense when they're not a terribly strong offensive team. This is a PK unit that's been pretty good, all things considered, especially among the top 3 in the NHL. Chicago and Tampa Bay lead that spot, both above 84%. Calgary, though, is sitting right there in fourth at 83.7%, their PK percentage so far this year. And Calgary has been the cream of the crop, if you will, in the month of January, killed 96.3% of the penalties they faced so far. And with the Flames having one game coming up on Thursday at Minnesota, and then a home game with the Sharks at the end of the month, there's only 2 more chances for that to kind of change things around. And the locker room is aware of this. This is something that they feel really good about. Joel Farabee said as much, talking to NHL Flames on X.
We're just all on the same page, and even if there are breakdowns, we bail each other out. And I thought we've been producing some offense too on the penalty kill. So I think special teams in general is just one of those things. It's it's a momentum builder, whether you score or get scored on, or whatever the case may be. And I think right now just the PK, everyone feels good. We know our reads. We know before each game with our pre-scout, where we want to pressure and things like that. So I think it's just all about being on the same page. I think when you have that, like I said, even when there are breakdowns, we're in good spots.
That's the voice of Joel Farabee talking about the PK unit. Also gave a big nod to Trent Cole, the Flames assistant coach, who also mentioned it's probably the strength of the group that's killing, because we've lost Coles, who's a regular killer. We lost Beecher. He was a regular killer. Obviously, some differences with Rass and Whitey coming right in, but he's picked it up and doing a great job talking about the Rasmus Anderson trade for Zach Whitecloud, the Trent Cole-led penalty kill unit for this Calgary Flames squad. And why this matters is the fact that, could you imagine how bad this Calgary Flames team would be, how tough this year would be for Calgary had they not had this penalty kill unit? Such an offensive struggle. We're certainly going to talk a little bit more about that coming up in our second segment when we examine the 4 through 6 scorers for Calgary. But right now, 2.5 goals per game, which ranks second to last in the NHL and only in front of St. Louis, which will also bring a little bit of an honorable mention in the second segment too, because if you're looking for Calgary to get to the bottom of the standings and have a chance at that top pick, St. Louis is going to make it extremely hard because they're snatching defeats out of the jaws of victory in some ways in the middle of the country. So it's a tough road about it, but I think that's a pretty interesting quote, considering the fact that this team has had a successful penalty kill unit all year long, despite having to interchange parts. That's not always the case, especially on special teams units, because you got guys who are tasked to work together in specific ways. And it's impressive to think that Calgary has not only been one of the best units all year long, continuing to be one of the top shorthanded goal scoring teams in the entire National Hockey League, but they've gotten better, believe it or not, jumping into the 96% range in the month of January. Absolutely impressive. And I think that also is pretty indicative too of how good this unit is when they're playing scorers like Connor Bedard in the month of January. You have the matchups that Calgary has had against the young Montreal team, and with the Canadiens, it was a 4-1 loss that Calgary endured against the Canadiens. But when you look at the goals allowed, none of them were power play goals. Calgary didn't allow a single one among the 4 goals. Granted, the Canadiens had just 2 chances on the power play. Anyway, I mean, Sidney Crosby, Alexander Ovechkin's been in there, even Beckett Seneca with the Anaheim Ducks in that last matchup that Calgary had. All pretty impressive performances, all things considered, for Calgary in that matchup, and they were pretty okay in that game. Granted, I believe the Ducks, no, it was 0 for 2. Calgary was the one that scored the power play goal, which was somewhat unexpected. So I think it's worth giving some flowers in what has been an otherwise tough season for the Calgary Flames, just how good they've been on the PK unit this year. And Cole even mentioned, like, the first 15 or 20 games, this team wasn't great. So this has also been a little bit of a late blooming type outcome for Calgary. And when they finally figured out exactly the direction that they're supposed to go, it's worked. And it's continued, even though there's been new people who have had to fill roles when things haven't gone too well. So credit the Calgary Flames, the best penalty kill unit, except for the one game against Columbus when they were down on a 2-man advantage. That's the only time that Calgary is allowed a goal. So through the month of January, that's pretty impressive considering the one goal against them came on a 2-man down situation. How about the offense? How can Calgary raise its ability to score goals when it is blessed with strong goaltenders and a PK unit that doesn't put the Flames in bad situations? We'll examine more of the points getters for the Calgary Flames when this episode of Locked On Flames continues. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number. Nothing gets missed. It's how simple Quo makes everything. You can see every single full conversation thread, and everyone is on the same page. Replies go faster. They're more personal. And with Quo's smart AI tools, they automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnhl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnhl. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Thank you for making Locked On Flames your first listen every day. We are so glad that you are here. And if you haven't already, we invite you to check out the Everydayer Club, because you are the reason why Locked On is the #1 sports podcast network. And that's where, when you join the Everydayer Club, you get access to all of the Locked On hosts, on our members only Discord server. Inside there, there's folks chatting it up, talking about all things NHL and all the other sports that we cover too with Locked On Podcasts. And you get access to an ad-free audio feed of this podcast compatible with your favorite podcast player. So check it out, lockedonflames.supercast.com to learn more. The offense continues to struggle for the Calgary Flames, just 2.5 goals per game. And last show, we talked about the top 3 goal scorers for the Calgary Flames and kind of pointed to Blake Coleman as a reason that Calgary maybe has struggled more offensively in the recent weeks since he's been out with an injury. I'm excited to see what happens when he gets back, but right now you have to assume that you still won't see Blake Coleman until much later. And if that's the case, then who are you going to rely on? Coleman's still listed on the injured reserve. No transaction has been made, but there's still a lot of time before Thursday's game at Minnesota. But when you look at the top 3 scorers in points, and then you move down to the next tier, that group, there's a lot left to be desired. Now, a lot of these guys who are listed in this group, Matt Coronato, Morgan Frost, and Jonathan Huberdeau, got off the schneid in a way. Huberdeau and Coronato scoring goals in the 4-3 overtime loss to the Anaheim Ducks. But Coronato before that hadn't scored since the January 15th game against Chicago. Huberdeau hadn't scored in 10 games going back to the Philadelphia game on New Year's Eve. And then there's Morgan Frost, who did put one in against the Capitals. So not too long of a drought for Frost. But overall, this is a group that Calgary expects a lot of different things from, especially considering you have kind of a mix of how they started playing for the Flames. Coronato, one of those, draft picks that Calgary is putting into their already developed young talent, and a guy that you'd hope to see get more goals per game. You have Jonathan Huberdeau, who was arguably, the best person that you could get out of the Matthew Tkachuk situation. That's what the Flames certainly felt when they brought in Huberdeau from the Florida Panthers as part of the Matthew Tkachuk trade. And when you see that Coronato put in 24 goals in 77 games last year, the pace isn't there. It's not the same. +6 a season ago and ±20 so far this year. Morgan Frost, the third version of how they got acquired, came in via a trade, certainly, but this was a thing that the Flames seem to feel good about in terms of bringing in Farabee and Frost at the same time from the Flyers and have him be one of the contributing factors for Calgary with a trade that wasn't as much of a blockbuster or a headliner as the one that Matthew Tkachuk did. 2 of those 3, Coronato and Huberdeau, are signed through the end of the decade. Frost is not at the end of the 2026-27 season is when his signing is up. But that said, Huberdeau, Coronato in the mix. How do you make this work, especially with Huberdeau having scored 9 goals in all the games played this year, which is a significant dip from where he was a year ago. Well-documented significant dip. And that's one of the things, too, that I can't help but bring up again is the fact that everyone knows, including Hubie, that he's underperforming for what not only Calgary expects of him, but for what he's paid. And I don't see a situation where he's going to get back on track, because every time that something good happens in a couple of games for Hubie, nothing else really emerges. You have that last season with Florida, the 115-point season, where he was +35, scoring 30 goals. For Calgary, he only got close to the 30-goal mark a year ago, and that was still with 62 points to his name compared to the 115. I mean, 115 outlier, you always take the top and the bottom, and you get rid of those results, and you kind of find yourself somewhere in the middle. Huberdeau, 62 points is still a little bit low from what Calgary would expect too. I mean, you got a guy who with Florida was able to put up 92 in 2018, 19 with the Panthers, and 78 the year after. Leaves a lot to be desired for Calgary. So who's going to emerge from this top 6 in point scorers? I don't even know. There's one piece that really stuck out to me from Farabee talking to NHL Flames on X. I played some audio from him about the penalty kill unit, which has been really solid for the Calgary Flames. But there was another thing that he said talking about how he is approaching his game right now on the offensive side, because he was asked about Calgary's inability to score goals. This is Joel Farabee answering that question again to NHL Flames on X.
Maybe was put a lot of pressure on myself to get points and things like that, and I think just kind of how I've evolved as a player. I know I'm not going to be a point per game guy in this league, and I'm probably not going to score 30 goals or anything like that. Obviously I have high expectations for myself at the same time, but I kind of know who I am as a player and what I need to do for this, for myself and the team to be successful. And I think for me it's being good on the defensive part of the game and being reliable and blocking shots and things like that. So I try to focus on that stuff, and in the back of my head I know that if I do the right things and go to the net, the points will come.
And this conversation is focused around numbers 4 through 6. Farabee will be on a future look at the Calgary points totals, but at the same time, what stuck out to me about that quote was this resignation about knowing exactly where he's at. And I think a lot of that is genuinely healthy from a non-sports point of view. It's good to have that self-awareness, but at the same time, you kind of hope that Farabee is still playing with some level of confidence, and I'm worried that that may not be the case. I also could interpret that quote as he is feeling confident. He knows exactly his role, and right now that's the things that he brings to the defensive side of the puck. But you go from 50 points with the Flyers on the heels of a couple upper 30-point seasons 2 of the 3 years prior, down to 19 that last 50 games with Philadelphia, 6 in his first 30 games with Calgary, and then you're at 20 right now with 10-10 in terms of goals and assists. So I think that soundbite is a mixture of self-awareness, but also a little bit of where Calgary is from a confidence standpoint on the offensive side of the game. And that's definitely concerning, because you want your team to talk about things from I'm still capable of doing this. It's going to work. But that definitely sounds a little bit more like I'm resigned. And that's the part that is concerning to me, even though generally being pretty self-aware is a healthy point of view. So I'm interested to see how Farabee finishes out with Calgary this season. There's one last little tag that I want to throw onto this, because Locked On NHL was talking about the St. Louis Blues. And one thing that we talked about on Tuesday's edition of Locked On Flames was how The Athletic has Calgary right now likely to pick number 2, or at least have the second best odds for the top pick in the 2026 NHL entry draft. And that's just a result of looking at the schedule, what's ahead, and then the way that they have their algorithm, ranking individual players and then therefore ranking individual teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you want more of an explanation on that, go back to Tuesday's show. But St. Louis was a team that right now is below Calgary in the standings, and they, in that Athletic prediction, are ranked the 5th likeliest to have the number 1 pick. And so something's going to swing, apparently, for St. Louis. And beyond things like strength of schedule, the Locked On NHL folks are also highlighting those moments that the Blues snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
The Dallas-St. Louis game tonight, this was one that I think everyone wanted to hide their head in the sand after this one. Dallas with a big 3-goal explosion in the second period. Jordan Binnington labored through the period. In the third, it was the other way around. 3-goal explosion for St. Louis. And this has been a weird stretch for both of these teams. Every time I watch Dallas, I'm like, I wonder, are they as good as their record indicates? And every time I watch St. Louis, I think to myself, how could they be this bad? And then you see it, the mistake that gets made with a minute to go in the third, a minute 5 to go in the third period, off of what I believe was a design play in the faceoff dot. And Thomas Harley ultimately scores his 3rd of the season to give Dallas a 4-3 lead that would be insurmountable. St. Louis can't even get a point out of this one. Jake Ottinger stops 23 of 26, not a pristine night for him. Jordan Binnington, 20 of 24, the last one being the dagger. And I said this to you when we were doing our prep work. If you're of the belief that this season is over for the Blues, this is a perfect tank game, because they fought their way back into it and then still lost without getting a point.
For those who are voting ethical tank, or as I saw one person on YouTube describe, the humanitarian tank for the Calgary Flames, there you go. St. Louis is also having key components of an ethical tank as they work toward the bottom of the Western Conference standings. Something to tag on to the end of that segment talking about Calgary's offense, and I definitely am interested to see how the race to the bottom potentially goes if Calgary is going to realize having one of their best draft picks in franchise history, if not the best draft pick in Calgary Flames history. I mentioned I'm a Flames fan of a few decades. That means there's a good swath of Calgary Flames lore, history that I didn't see firsthand. And so I want to bring some of that to you each and every week. So on Wednesdays, we'll examine this week in Calgary Flames history. We'll do that next as Locked On Flames continues. It's the last call for football and FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff. The final chance to get in on the action board for the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on Friday's, or rather Thursday's edition of the show, we will review the matchup that's on the way in Minnesota. It's Wild and Flames on Thursday, and then we'll move ahead into Friday's show and take a look at what we learned this week in Calgary Flames hockey. I mentioned at the top of the show that I have been a decades-long Flames fan, but that decades-long stretch goes into the mid part of the 2000s. Now, I remember seeing ads for Calgary Flames hockey growing up an hour south of Alberta and north central Montana. And so the Flames were not necessarily completely foreign to me before 2004, but I certainly wasn't watching Flames hockey the way that I started to maybe around 2010, even into the early part of the 2010s. So there's a little bit of a blind spot for me with key moments in Flames history, and I want to kind of rectify that and also share some fun moments with you. And so I'm going to call this one This Week-ish in Calgary Flames history, because this actually dates back to the 22nd of 1987's month of January. That was where there was a huge snowstorm in the Northeast. And it makes me kind of think of right now, because over the course of the last week of time, where I live in the Pacific Northwest, fairly spared from a lot of the weather that was hitting the middle part. When you look at it from, west to east, the middle section on a left to right kind of map with the U.S., and everything is getting really cold. I was talking to folks in Atlanta where the temperatures were in the 20s, talking to folks in Massachusetts where the temperature was in the 10s. And that's kind of what happened this time back in 1987. What has become known as the 334 game. There was expected to be 11,000 plus fans to see Calgary's game at New Jersey. Only 334 were actually able to make it. And this was something that was told to both NHL.com. Stan Fischler wrote it back a couple of years ago. And then CalgaryFlames.com also did a little piece on it from George Johnson. This was even later, or rather earlier. And there's a quote from Lanny in here, Lanny McDonald, saying, 334, are you sure? Oh my God. I would have thought maybe 250. The fact that anyone showed up at all still stuns me. And they talked about how multiple times Flames players, because they were arguably the easiest group to get to the arena, having been at a hotel well closer to the arena than even some of the Devils players were able to. It was something that the Flames team had to warm up a couple of different times, because the initial puck drop kept getting moved back and moved back and moved back. So, this is a paper piece from the NHL.com story that the headline, neither Blizzard nor Calgary can stop the Devils, because they ended up getting the victory. And even quotes from some of the other Flames players talking about how they just ended up being in the dressing area waiting and waiting. There was no cancellation of the game. It just kept getting pushed back and back. And the one quote from Dale McCourt, one of the lines people in the game, said the Flames were all there and ready, and pretty soon a bunch of Devils arrived. There was another quote that said it seemed like 4 or 5 hours to get there. At times we got stuck in the right lane. We'd have to drive on the other side and then back again in order to keep going. We took every imaginable road and pathway before we were able to make it. And so the lore of this certainly is a little bit more New Jersey focused than it is Calgary, but they ended up getting contact information, apparently, of all of the 334 fans that ended up going to the game. And that became this club that the Devils created out of this. And yeah, 334 folks ended up seeing a 7-5 victory for New Jersey in that matchup. Just a pretty cool like moment in time that Calgary happened to be part of, and it made the CalgaryFlames.com 37 for 37 when they were looking back at special moments in Calgary Flames history. So yeah, I even saw in the NHL.com story they had little name tags made for the 334 to kind of commemorate that moment. So yeah, I would be interested to see if you know of somebody who was part of the club 334 or something along those lines. I'm interested to see if that's something that you know about. So let us know in the YouTube comments or on our social media channels. Certainly would be interested to see you there. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Locked On Flames. Invite you again to tune in on Thursday's show when we preview the matchup with the Flames traveling to the Wild. Please subscribe, follow Locked On Flames, get all of the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, then take the next step. Become part of the Everydayer Club. It is built for you. Go to lockedonflames.supercast.com and let us know what you'd like to see from an Everydayer Club subscription. In addition to access to that members-only Discord server, you also get the show ad-free. That's again supercast.com with lockedonflames.supercast.com. For those of you on video, we invite you to stay tuned. We're going to send you over to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. And for those joining us on audio, make your second listen NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL. My name is Ryan G. Thanks for having fun with us. We'll see you again soon for more Locked On Flames.